Welcome to Lit Happens, Unpacking Senior English. I'm Adriel.
And I'm Belle.
We're experienced English teachers dedicating to supporting both new and experienced educators in a world in which we are often time poor, to empower our students to excel in their English studies.
If you're an English teacher, like us, navigating this curriculum, then this podcast is designed with you in mind. And our mission really is to break down the complexities by unpacking English nationally. Welcome back to another episode of Lit Happens. I'm Belle, and here we've got Adriel.
Hey guys, how are we going?
Hey, so wrapping up the school holidays now. We hope everyone's had a bit of some R&R and getting into the swing of things again. I know it's always sad when a school holidays comes to an end, but we're going to prepare you with some more Module C text coming your way, because we know that now we're going to be getting into the Module C rubric and getting into the text and getting kids creative writing in preparation for the upcoming trials. So that'll be exciting. So today we're actually going to do an episode on the poem Stamp Collecting by Kim Cheng Boey. So Adriel is going to be really kind to give us some wonderful insights on that. He's going to take us through how it aligns with the Mod C Craft of Writing rubric, and then breaking it down so that students can make meaningful connections and hopefully springboard. Because it's a really nice text coming off the back of sort of the Asian text and the Asian poetry as well. Adriel?
Awesome. Oh, hopefully everyone is excited and ready to get back into teaching. It takes a few days for me to get started. I know that will be the case. But look, what an exciting text to start off with. Kim Cheng Boey's Stamp Collecting, and it definitely does align closely with a lot of the text that we have spoken about in the last few weeks. And I think we're particularly going to be looking at the way it uses its language to convey its ideas and emotions, and how sort of powerfully it does it. Because poetry is a form which looks at precision. Every word counts. Every piece of structure that we look at, every piece of punctuation, grammatical features, like everything counts when it comes to poems. And this is a core focus of this module. So it's very, very important for us to sort of look at. And I guess we'll start off with that. So what we look at here is the rubric, looking for students to write for a range of audiences and purposes. And what we see with Bowie's poem in this circumstance, or in this case here, it exemplifies this by addressing both a personal audience, which is his daughter, and then we see a broader cultural one. And this reflects the shared experiences of migration and memory. So again, it sort of links into some of the ideas that we have covered in Text and Human Experiences as well, the shared common experiences that we might look at. But I mean, this can be seen in the poem in many sort of instances. One instance, when we look at this sort of idea of migration and memory, is the use of this intimate tone when he sort of quotes in the line, "I want to bequeath my daughter the albums." And this speaks directly to his child. While the broader theme of that cultural displacement resonates with readers who have experienced migration. And this is something that we have all experienced in Australia. It's the very fabric of our country. And we're going to start to see that. I mean, now come election time, there's lots of things happening, and we see, the variety of different sort of demographics in different areas, the cultural sort of diversity of Australia. It's beautiful. It's a wonderful sort of thing that we look at. There's a few things there. I can probably also look at the fact that the rubric also emphasizes appreciating and analyzing texts as models. Now, remember this, for the writing for your students as models for their own writing. That's very, very important. So when we look at these texts, we have to look at specifically how they express insights and evoke emotion. So again, in Stamp Collecting, we see Bowie uses the language to convey the insight that memory and identity are interconnected, as seen in lines such as "my childhood coming into place" or "under her learning fingers." And this reflective tone invites emotional engagement, showing students how to craft writing that resonates deeply with the readers, whether it be imaginative or discursive. Now, I know we've been focusing a lot on imaginative, but just keep in mind, we also have the discursive form that we need to consider as well. We look at the aesthetics of language, which Bowie does demonstrate again through his lyrical sort of style and vivid imagery, which we'll unpack a little bit more when we go into the unpacking or the close reading of the poem. You know, one of the lines that sort of stands out to me is, you know, he says in the poem, quote, "A Chinese junk, and this blends its cultural heritage with visual beauty." This aligns with the rubric's call for students to appreciate the power of language, to share that aesthetic vision, offering a model for their own compositions. And then we look at, you know, the writing process. Remember that it's like a layered structure when we look at writing, okay? And in particular, when we see the poem here, it moves from childhood to parenthood, and it mirrors the recursive nature of drafting and revising, something that we might consider in our own writing. So by studying this text, what we allow our students to do is, you know, they can start to see how language choices shape meaning for specific purposes, which is a skill that they can apply to their own writing in order to sort of get into those upper echelons of the band sixes that they may be aiming for.
Perfect. That's a really great introduction. Just to clue us in on like the ways that it relates to the rubric, some of the key aspects of the text, how it uses language and emotion. Can you break down for us the context of stamp collecting and just maybe explain how the background influences have helped shape this text, and then how that can align back to our rubric as well?
Yeah, awesome. So we see Bowie's background here, where he explores the influences that help shape this text, and how they align with Module C's rubric focus on crafting these meaningful compositions through a variety of different ways. So we have to remember that Kim Cheng Boey was a Singaporean Australian poet, born in Singapore in 1965 and migrated to Australia in 1997, which is a move that deeply influenced his writing. Stamp collecting, published in, you know, this Contemporary Asian Australian Poets in 2013, which is a selection of text that we've already looked at for the standard module, reflects Bowie's experiences of migration, cultural displacement, and the search for belonging. And these are themes that are central to his body of work. So growing up in Singapore during the 1970s, we see it's a period of rapid modernization. We look at modern day Singapore and you see it's this beautiful modern metropolis, isn't it? And you know, during this period of rapid modernization, following its separation from Malaysia in 1965, it's quite important to think about. Bowie experienced a shifting cultural landscape, which is evident in the poem's references to Singapore series and when it was still part of Malaya. On key influence in the poem in Bowie's personal history of migration and transnational identity, having lived in Singapore, Hong Kong, and later Australia, Bowie often explores the tension between the past and present. We see home and exile. So in stamp collecting, this is reflected in lines such as between houses, countries, and other lines, and lives, where stamps become a metaphor for his fragmented identity. This aligns with Module C rubric's emphasis on writing for a range of purposes. As what we see here is Bowie crafts a reflective piece that speaks to both the personal and universal experiences of displacement. And this might be a model for your students to explore their own identities in writing, something that they might consider and something that they can put into their own writing. I think that's quite interesting. I like this idea of stamp collecting. It's no longer an activity that would see contemporary children or, you know, people, adults in particular, take part in. I don't think my generation did as much either. It would have been the previous generations. But I know my version of this is looking at my fridge, for example, in every sort of country that I go to. You know, we grab, you know, one thing is those fridge magnets, and
that's
you know,
so true.
Cities that you've been to, and it just shows this diverse, you know, shifting cultural landscape that we have, because we are now in this sort of globalized world. Like, why do we go through that process of stamp collecting? Why do we go through that process of collecting these different sort of symbols?
Like this need to like record this stuff.
It's quite interesting. So that's part of that transnational identity that we see in Bowie's work. We can also look at another influence, which may be the historical context of post-colonization or post-colonialism. particularly the legacy of the British colonialism in Southeast Asia, as seen in the allusion to the line where he says, "The face of youthful Elizabeth on stamps." And it's still such a common sort of thing right now. We have Queen Elizabeth on, the back of, I think it's the 5-cent pieces and whatnot, and then even on our $5 note, sorry. This reflects Bowie's awareness of how colonial history shaped cultural identity as well, which is a theme that resonates with the rubric's call for our students to express insights through their compositions, encouraging them to consider those broader historical sort of forces in their own writing as well. So it's something that they can consider for their own work. So overall, what we see is Bowie's background as a poet and academic also helps to shape the poem's lyrical style and reflective tone. His deep engagement with literary traditions, influenced by poets like, I should say this, I was going to say Seamus, it's Seamus Heaney. Seamus Heaney, who also explored memory and place, is evident in the poem's nostalgic tone and vivid imagery. And we've sort of looked at the sort of lines, that may reflect that so far. And we, in doing so, it aligns with the rubric's focus again on the aesthetics of language, and this provides students a model to craft compositions that evoke emotion and share this aesthetic vision.
That's wonderful. I think that's really thorough context so that when you're going through this with students, they can see how the purpose of the piece really aligns with the background forces that have influenced it. You've done a really great job with that. What about in terms of Bowie's use of language? How does he use language to convey insights about memory, about identity? And I guess which techniques do you think students could adopt for their own writing to springboard off of?
So again, Bowie's language in stamp collecting conveys, those profound insights about memory and identity. And he does this with precision. That's probably the important thing, because we can often look at these ideas and we can look at these sorts of insights on certain themes or concepts, but it can be very generalized. It can be very broad. And when it comes to our Mod C writing, especially when we look at our students' work, they need to be able to do this with this precision of writing, and the way that they sort of meaningfully use the different elements of language, structure, and form in order to convey their ideas. And we see this with Bowie here. He uses the metaphor of the album breathing and the promise in its flesh, that gluey feel. And this introduces the idea of stamp collecting as a journey of discovery. I love that. And this suggests that memory holds the promise of understanding one's identity. I think that's so important. And what we see with this metaphorical language here, it invites students to use similar devices in their own writing to convey these abstract ideas. These ideas that are not the surface level cliched ideas, but abstract ideas, things that might link with them, that might resonate with a broader audience. And these can be things such as personal growth, and you can reflect that idea of personal growth through maybe a tangible image, maybe imagery, which is a technique that can add depth to their compositions.
For sure.
Speaking on imagery, you might look at sensory imagery in stamp collecting. So he says in the line, as in, my 5-year-old fingers gingerly slip the countries into place. And this evokes that sense of childhood wonder, conveying the insights that early experiences conveying the insight that early experiences might shape on our identities. This tactile detail of, gingerly the fingers creating, an emotional connection, a technique that students might adopt to ground maybe these abstract themes in that sensory experience, whether writing imaginatively or discursively again. The poem also uses symbolism to explore identity. And we see this in the line, with an atlas of vanished countries, CCP, Yugoslavia, and so on and so forth. And this symbolizes the lost cultural identities tied to Bowie's heritage. This language choice conveys the insight that identity is fluid. I think that's quite important for us in this contemporary day and age as well.
Very true.
It's shaped by that historical change. And this, again, might encourage our students here to incorporate symbolism in their compositions, not just for the lazy fact of just adding a symbol, but it needs to maybe reflect maybe a concept or a theme that might be more complex in nature. And this might be something like cultural loss that we see throughout stamp collecting. You might also look at, the reflective tone. And we can see this in the line where he says, "I remember the thrill as my fingers walked the filmy rows." And this conveys Bowie's emotional connection to his past. What we see here is the tone invites readers to share in his nostalgia, a method, again, that students can use to create that emotional resonance in their writing. There's a few things that we can really, really consider. And finally, illusion. Illusion is a beautiful technique for students to use in their imaginative composition. So the allusion to the face of the youthful Elizabeth introduces that historical layer, highlighting how colonial legacies influence identity as well. And it allows our students to then weave that historical reference into their writing, as well.
True. I love how you've listed them and you kind of outlined them with the example, because it's basically becomes a bit of a checklist. Here's a checklist of some great techniques, great expressive techniques. Here are some examples of how they've been used, and then you could ask students to consider how might they reshape or reinterpret them for their own text. And I think that's excellent, because it stops students from just passively, I guess, analyzing and, well, what can I do with this now? So that's excellent. That's excellent.
Yeah, thank you.
What about in terms of then structure and form? So how does, the poem use structure and form to enhance how it explores memory and identity? And then I guess in what ways can students use that as a lesson and apply that to their own hopefully band 6 compositions?
Yeah, awesome. So structure is quite important. We look at, structure, language, form as part of our rubric sort of statements here. And the structure of stamp collecting definitely enhances its exploration of these ideas, this framing of ideas around memory and identity. And it does this through a chronological sort of progression across 3 phases. We see phase 1 being childhood, into adulthood, and then into parenthood. So we see the poem begins with Bowie's daughter collecting stamps. And this shifts to his childhood memories. As in, we see the line where it's like the years of collecting culminated in 3 bountiful, loaded albums. And then it ends with a reflective moment of legacy, where he suggests in the poem, "I want to bequeath my daughter the albums." This structure mirrors the layering of memory, showing how identity evolves over time. A technique that students can use to create depth in their own writing by structuring their compositions around a timeline of personal growth. So this sort of alleviates that sort of typical narrative arc that we see students wanting to write about in their Mod C compositions. This is a nice way to sort of look at it. It's a timeline that is based on personal growth. The free verse form here in the poem, with its lack of a strict meter, allows for a conversational tone, as we see this in the enjambment of the line where it says, "The question spill out like the stamps from an old album." And this form reflects the fluid, organic nature of memory, encouraging us to experiment with free verse to capture personal reflections authentically, a method that can make students' writing more genuine and engaging. It's another sort of example
and more
that we
unique.
can have.
Yeah, love that.
Yeah, 100%. It steps away from that traditional sort of very structured form that can sometimes limit students when it comes to our Mod C compositions.
Sure.
Definitely very, very important to consider. And then the final thing that we can look at here is maybe the poem's cyclical structure. And I love this. I like a cyclical piece because
I love it too.
Ties everything up. And, we see that in this poem, the poem's cyclical structure ending with the daughter slipping a stamp with, home. In the line there, reinforces the theme of identity as a continuous journey, which connects past and present. And this is something that I really, really would encourage for us to, encourage our students to apply by, looking at how they structure their compositions with maybe a circular narrative. Maybe returning to an initial image or idea to create a sense of closure. I think that's very, very important when it comes to imaginative pieces. And this is something that stamp collecting definitely does showcase quite well. And this, what this does is, the reason I sort of encourage this is because it enhances that thematic coherence, and
Right.
leaves that lasting impact on the reader.
Right.
It doesn't mean that all the answers are, sort of full stop, this is how it ends sort of thing, but it gives a sense of closure, which is what we're always looking for when it comes to
Yes.
a lot of these pieces. And closure does not mean the end, it just means it gives us a satisfaction, I think.
Yeah. That's a
When
great
it
way
comes
of
to our
putting it
writing.
for sure. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So yeah, there's a few things that we can look at when it comes to our structure and form. And
Mm-hmm.
again, the purpose of what we're going through today, obviously it's written in the form of a poem, but we're looking at the way that these elements of structure, form, language, we can get our students to apply in their own writing, and then that's going to be
Mm-hmm.
very, very significant.
Amazing. So let's say then, teachers have encouraged students to, go through this text, do some analysis. So once they've done that, what are some band 6 tips that, can be taken away just to encourage them to excel in their crafting, drafting, and refining of their, Module C compositions?
Yeah, awesome. So I think for a band 6 response, for teachers, when we encourage our students, we need to draw maybe some of the key lessons that stamp collecting sort of presents. So first, we need to understand that we have to craft our compositions with purpose. Purpose is very, very important. So we see, for example, in stamp collecting, Bowie's clear focus on memory and identity really guides us to define a central theme. I think that's quite important. And these themes may be something like, belonging or heritage. And it's important to establish this before writing, because if you don't establish purpose, you have no direction when it comes to your piece. And we see this in particular with stamp collecting. So what can we do as teachers? Maybe we can facilitate this by, brainstorming, or using brainstorming sessions to help maybe our students identify a meaningful theme that resonates with their own experiences.
Great.
Making sure to ensure that their writing has that clear direction. So by the end of it, like, rather than just saying, hey, I want you to just go write a creative piece based on the poem, before you get that, we have to sort of really unpack it. We have to scaffold it. And one of the initial parts will be scaffolding purpose before we get started there. So that's probably the first thing, craft with purpose. Secondly, we have to draft with techniques in mind, and that's very, very significant. I know particularly I've had a few students recently where, we go off and it's like, okay, cool, you fix this element, now go off and fix this. And it's a back and forth, motion where it's like 7 or 8, 9, 10 drafts later, and they finally come to their final piece. And every time they go back and draft, it's like they draft with maybe new techniques in mind, or maybe, okay, hang on, I can say this a little bit better now that I've constructed this. And that is the significant thing that we really, really need to consider. So we look at Bowie's use of metaphor and imagery in particular through stamp collecting, and students should maybe look to experiment with at least 2 devices per paragraph, such as sensory imagery to evoke emotion, or symbolism to convey that deeper meaning. What can we do as teachers here? We can assign maybe a drafting task, maybe get them to write a 300-word reflective piece using one of Bowie's techniques. You might get them to look at how symbolism is used in the poem, the symbolism of stamps, for example, to explore personal memory. And this might encourage your students to layer their writing with literary devices. And then once we've got that drafting and we've crafted with purpose, we need to refine for precision. And this is that word that we sort of established at the beginning. Remember that Bowie's vivid language, things like, that serrated tokens, show the importance of word choice. Students need to edit their drafts to replace vague words with evocative ones. And this enhances the impact and ensures the technical accuracy of their piece, and also allows us to sort of help improve in their grammar and their syntax. For teachers, you can provide your students with peer editing checklists, which focus on clarity, maybe emotional resonance, and punctuation and accuracy. And this will help students meet maybe those upper bands of band descriptors when producing their compositions. When it comes to yeah, the final sort of checks, and that idea of precision is very, very important. So yeah, there's a few things that we can look at when it comes to our Band 6 responses. But yeah, there's many more. But I think if we look at the three particular things: crafted purpose, draft, and then refine for precision. I think that's very, very important.
Perfect. So then that's wonderful. Like very good, practical, achievable steps. So that's really great. Thank you, Adriel. What about lastly, well, what practical steps can our listeners take to try and apply some of these lessons from stamp collecting to their Module C writing, and how they can engage with Lit Happens for further support?
Yeah, awesome. So again, remember, you can apply the lessons from stamp collecting to your Module C writing with the practical steps that I just highlighted previously. One example here might be, first you might select a personal object that holds meaning. So for example, we see with Boey and stamp collecting, Boey stamps. And you might get your students to write something like a 300-word reflective piece, which I sort of mentioned before, using maybe sensory imagery to explore identity. You might think about how specific texture or smell evokes a memory.
Nice.
Secondly, once we've done that, you might look at experimenting with structure by crafting maybe a cyclical narrative. Start and end with the same image. It might be something like a family heirloom to create a sense of closure, mirroring Bowie's approach.
Nice.
And then the final thing here is make sure you edit your draft with a focus on precision. I think that's very, very important. So replace at least, maybe 5 vague general words with vivid ones. You might swap a word like nice, for example, for radiant, and make sure you check your grammar to ensure that the piece is, that final piece that you're ready to take with you into the exam or for your assessment task. So there's a few things that you can definitely take hopefully, from this reading of stamp collecting. There's many more, and definitely play with it. You're the teacher. Look at how it speaks with you. Engage with it. We're just giving you a few sort of stepping stones. But yeah, look, for more support, remember, visit our website. We are going to have a few guides coming out soon. Wonderful work from Belle, who has been creating some great things for Mod C in particular. So check it out. The free samples are attached to our Mod C episode as well.
Perfect.
And yeah, remember, follow us on Instagram, TikTok. Give us a rating and comment on our Spotify episodes. It just gives us a little bit more exposure there, and we'd love to hear what you guys want to hear. Our YouTube channel as well. But yeah, look, it's very, very important for us to hear from you guys. We love the feedback. We want to know what you guys are wanting to hear as we continue to move into the second part of the year here now. So yeah, where we're starting to prep our Year 12 kids for the HSC.
Yeah, and spread the word. Share our podcast or the episode that you really enjoyed with, colleagues, friends, teachers from other schools. The more the merrier.
Yeah, 100%. No, thank you. But yeah, look, hopefully you guys have a few good things out of today's episode. Great poem to listen to. Thank you once again for supporting us on this journey. Thank you, Bill, for all the great work you're doing. And
thank you, likewise. And thank you for this episode on Bowie stamp collecting. As always, you've done a thorough job at pulling out some of the key things that teachers can zone in on in their classroom, but also offering some wonderful tips and strategies. Like everything you said could be write it on the board and try and apply it, and that's like time-saving gold there. So thank you so much. I'm sure everybody who listens to this will appreciate it immensely. Thank you.